Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dynamic Pricing is Not Enough. We're so pleased to have so many folks on the line here today, and we have a lot to cover today. So know that we're going to move quickly in order to cover as much as possible in one short hour. So what do we mean when we say dynamic pricing is not enough? Well, in our pricing and demand management work, which you'll learn more about today, we know that dynamic pricing is just a small piece of the puzzle when it comes to maximizing revenue. In today's webinar, we'll be talking about pricing and demand management strategies with a focus today on reserved seating events. Now, some of you may not have reserved seating, but please know that the principles we discuss will still apply to you. If any of you have questions about how to apply those principles to your specific organization, please feel free to reach out and ask us. Before we get started, let's just make a few introductions. I'm Christina Hill. I'm a senior consultant for TRG Arts. I'm based in London and working with our UK clients.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephen Skrypec, a consulting analyst for TRG Arts. I'm also based in the UK and I work with our UK and US clients.
And we are also so pleased to be joined by one of our current clients who will share her experience with you here today. Claire, will you tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Claire Murray. I'm Interim Chief Executive at Sheffield Theatres, whilst Dan Bates, our CEO, is away on sabbatical in the Far East. And I'm also Communications and Fundraising Director here too. I've been here for 9 years. Really looking forward to speaking today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Claire. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, please keep your phone or your microphone on your computer on mute. This is the best way to ensure that everyone will be able to hear. Feel free to send us any questions that you have throughout the presentation of the webinar. You can submit those by clicking on the questions feature in the main navigation bar on your screen. We'll be answering those questions at the end of our presentation. And then also, please know that this webinar will be recorded. We'll be uploading it to the TRG website in the coming days. We'll also send you an email with a link to the recording in case you should want to refer back to it later. We may not get to every question today, so please know that if we don't get to your question, we will reach out to you directly to provide an answer if you just remember to give us your name and your organization when you submit that question. If you'd like to follow up with TRG directly after the phone call, please send an email to letstalk@trgarts.com. And finally, if you'd like to tweet about this webinar, join that conversation on Twitter with the hashtag TRGwebinar. Now, the reason that we're here today is that we at TRG are true believers in the power of arts and culture to transform individuals and communities. We want to see arts organizations like yours succeed. We want to build a more vibrant arts ecosystem in every community.
We love this type of work at TRG because we are a consulting firm that's intellectually curious and data-driven. Here's a few of our team, most of these fast asleep in the middle of America right now. At TRG, we work across art genres in 4 countries. We work in the US, Canada, Australia, and here in the UK. And we are proud to have worked with some of these fantastic forward-thinking organizations. We approach the work that we do at TRG in a specific way, and it starts with data. We learn from that data in the context of the hundreds of client organizations that we've worked with, and we are devoted to teaching and giving back to the field. Christina, I'm going to have to ask you to proceed the presentation. It's not connecting at this end. Thank you. Now, there's a few terms that we're going to be using in this presentation that may be new to you, and let's define those quickly. The first is patron. When we use the word patron, we are talking about anyone who has had a transaction with an arts organization. This could be a ticket purchase, a membership, donation, or any other type of engagement. And hopefully we're collecting contact information and seeking permission so that we can communicate with them directly and invite them back. You'll also hear us talk about single ticket buyers. And this is someone who's purchased tickets that were not part of a package or a group. That may be several seats for a performance or across a number of shows in a season, but the key thing is it's not part of a season ticket or subscription package or membership. And we'll also talk about per capita revenue, per head revenue. This is known in the UK often as ticket yield, and average per cap would also be known as average ticket price. So pricing and demand management is a favourite subject at TRG Arts. It's also a big subject, and we're going to focus on 3 areas today. We'll demonstrate how dynamic pricing alone may be losing you revenue, and we'll discuss TRG's 3-pronged strategy for pricing and demand management. We'll also share examples from other organisations to help you consider your own opportunities, and that's why Claire's with us today.
Now, you might be thinking, how on earth could I be losing money with a dynamic pricing strategy? And the simple answer is incomplete process or execution. Think of it this way. You are very close to your product. Are you looking deep enough? And are you using data to inform your decisions? In pricing and demand management strategy, I like to use the example of a 3-legged stool. If you make adjustments to only one leg of that stool, you will be unbalanced. So what are the 3 legs of that stool? There are 3 factors that should make up your pricing strategy. First, loyalty. Is your pricing strategy rewarding loyalty and motivating desired behavior? If you have subscribers or multi-buyers or season ticket packages, are those subscribers or package holders truly getting the best deal? Are discounts introduced to promote early or repeat buying? Then prices. If you're not nimble enough to get in front of demand and take action, you may be losing money by selling out your inventory at lower prices or bumping prices too late to have any real impact. Conversely, if prices are too high or the jumps between price levels are too high, you could be losing sales due to price resistance. And then finally, perception. Pricing is just one leg of that stool. Your scale of house or where your price bands are located must be optimized. Or if you're an unreserved house or pricing for an exhibition, it's how you price your day of the week or your time of the day that must be considered, so that you have the perception of success, even in low demand. This begins the process. And you'll see some detailed examples shortly. But first, let's just think about the goal of dynamic pricing. Obviously, the goal is to maximize revenue, but here's an important reminder. It's important to keep in mind the reason for our demand management work, which is to maximize revenue so that we're building a more sustainable organization that allows us to deliver on our mission. Now, pricing alone doesn't get you there. When we work with clients during our pricing and demand management summits, one of the first things we teach is the fact that in a successful revenue plan, setting prices comes after you've built a foundation. Here's what we can tell you. Demand is the thing. Demand is what drives pricing. So what's the difference between demand-based pricing and dynamic pricing? Well, let's reorient ourselves from thinking about pricing to thinking about demand. Demand-based pricing is a strategy. It's a strategy that takes the levels of sales demand into account. It requires an assessment of sales history and current sales pacing. It optimizes revenue in high demand environments, and it impacts operational practice, not just pricing decisions. Dynamic pricing, on the other hand, is a tactic. It's a tactic in which we change ticket prices after they go on sale for events that are in either high or low demand. It includes price increases and decreases, and it applies to single ticket and group sales. So let's look at a few graphs to illustrate these points. This is a simplified diagram which illustrates what we often see with traditional scale of house plans and pricing strategies. So when a performance goes on sale, you have an average ticket price or per cap. As demand increases, that per cap goes up. But however, by the end of the show or end of the run, the per cap goes down simply because the inventory that we're selling that's left to sell is lower priced inventory or discounts are being applied. So here's what we want to see. This is what ideal scale and inventory management can accomplish. We go on sale with all price levels, using low price to satisfy those who are price sensitive and to fill highly visible but hard to fill areas. Then as demand increases, the inventory that is released is at the higher price levels. And then by the day of the show or end of the run, those per caps are naturally higher. If you think about dynamic price bumps, it might look something like this. A well-executed scale and inventory management system will increase revenue naturally, and dynamic pricing is then icing on the cake. Of course, we can only increase prices when we have demand, and there's a limit to the behavior that we can drive based on multiple factors. Right now, for example, in your current season, there are performances that you can anticipate will be in high, moderate, or low demand. Patron response will be different for each of these performances, so your approach to it should be as well. When we develop revenue projections with clients, we look at historical sales trends as well as other drivers that can affect demand. Things like time of year and holidays, weeknights versus weekends, matinees versus evenings, urgency, time left to sell, programming, availability, location of seating, and then of course, perceived demand. Then there's another factor that can drive demand, and that is loyalty. Over time, we've identified and developed a methodology around loyalty that we know is a critical component of any effective pricing strategy. Loyalty is about getting your patrons to do more and deepening those relationships while you're also leveraging demand. This is a loyalty staircase, as we call it, and it demonstrates progressive levels of patron loyalty or patron engagement. A good demand management strategy activates pricing and access to both incentivize and reward loyalty. This not only builds loyalty, but it drives early purchase behavior. Now, there are a whole lot of reasons to develop a loyalty strategy, including things like increasing net revenue, lowering cost of sale, growing response rates. We'll cover those in future webinars. But for today, just remember that building loyalty also helps drive demand and should be part of your integrated pricing and demand management strategy. A note on dynamic pricing, remember, it's not just about raising prices. It's about matching price to demand. So when you have high demand, you raise prices because demand warrants that you do. When you have low demand and you're ahead of the game, you actually can lower prices strategically to reward loyalty, bring in new buyers, and stimulate demand.
So how do we create a strategic demand-based pricing strategy? Well, in an ideal world, this is how we all want to think about pricing, a domino effect. We'd like to have a simple action-reaction effect. We lower prices and demand goes up, but we know that patron behavior can be unpredictable. And in reality, reactions to pricing changes are more akin to a game of pool where one action can cause all the balls to go in different directions. For example, you might change your scale of house and people don't want to renew their season ticket or subscription. Or a group booker moves where they're historically seated because they're price sensitive. Or a cluster of patrons are sitting on a price break and they move just after the performance starts with that flip seat noise at the start of the show. At TRG, we take a three-pronged approach that's about maximizing any demand situation when you're in low or high demand or anything in between. And it starts with creating a scale of house that creates a great audience experience in all situations and works for you as demand builds. It includes a measured, managed approach to releasing inventory and the right inventory at the right time. And it leverages dynamic pricing when warranted, often in times of highest demand. The first element of your demand management strategy is scale of house. And when we develop a scale plan, our aim is to create a hot ticket or perception of high demand in any demand environment. And building a scale of house plan needs to have the right number of price points and seats per price level. When we go into this work, we look at years of data to understand buyer behavior. We want to look at where we have demand and where don't we. How are our scale maps performing in low, medium, or high demand scenarios? What is the absorption across price levels? How many seats are being sold in each price level versus the capacity? And where are people choosing to sit now across different genres or types of events? Understanding these trends allows us to conclude the right balance of prices and inventory for shows that are high sellers, low sellers, and everything in between. So let's review a few principles or goals of demand management that I'd like you to keep in mind as we continue with the section. First and foremost, we want to ensure that every performance has the perception of success. This means that the house looks well attended, even if it's not, and there are no visible gaps in the house based on how you scale. As demand increases and more of the house begins to fill, Christina said this earlier on, we want that per capita revenue or ticket yield to increase as well. If that's done well, the scale plan itself can make this happen without making any dynamic pricing increases. Inventory management, or managing what seats are released when, is the next goal. We want the house to dress itself as seats sell. So with the scale plan, ongoing inventory management is key as well. We want the house to fill from front to back and side to side. That might mean, if you're a multi-tier venue, that some of your tiers are not on sale when you initially have your on sale window. And finally, we've talked about it all the time, all of our decisions should be made with this in mind, that we want to honor and grow patron loyalty. So here's an example of what we would call a traditional scale plan. It's a large venue, yes, but the concepts are applicable to small venues as well. And if you have events with unreserved seating, or you're a museum with an exhibition admission, there are other ways of scaling and managing inventory based on demand here. But this particular hall, the highest prices are up front and the lowest prices at the very top. This is typically what we would see. Further here, we've got a very horizontal seating plan. The price levels go across the entire venue from left to right. And this scale plan will naturally scatter the audience throughout the entire venue. And we would look at that on a heat map. Here is a selection of performances that were in low demand using that old scale plan. And to orient you to this, the darker the colour, the more frequently the seat was filled. And if it's white, it wasn't sat in at all or may have been comped. Think here about all of those empty seats that we see on the plan, especially in these highly visible areas down front. How would a low demand venue event look like in your venue, seated or otherwise? There are a lot of empty seats for people to look at here. And let's also look at those seats at the top back of the balcony, looking down in front of them on empty seats, and perhaps before the start of the show questioning whether they've made the right decision to purchase, and certainly probably moving down into empty seats further forward once the show has started. We do see some high demand here in those centre seats and in the aisle seats. And we do have, you know, heat in every price level, but we can clearly see the price breaks on here. And that low price inventory at the top back of the balcony is not helping with perception of success. So based on sales data and these heat maps, we developed a new scale. And here is what that looks like. Our price options were simplified. We reduced the number of prices available in the auditorium. The key thing here is that lower prices were offered in hard to fill areas, and remaining price zones were drawn by demand. So you can see price levels D and E on the sides of the stalls downstairs there. Our centre and aisle seats were the highest demand there, and you can also see that we've got multiple price points horizontally to fill each section, vertically, sorry, to fill each section. And top section, the back of the balcony, look at that, they're actually the highest prices, because if there is that high level of demand, they will sell at the higher price, and that will continue to see that per cap, that yield increasing in our highest demand situations without any dynamic pricing.
So we've looked at scale planning. The second element of your demand management strategy should be inventory management. And when do we open up which seats for sale? First, I'll give you the definition. This means having the right number of seats available for the on sale and using a hold and release plan to open inventory as needed to control the perception of success. When it comes to inventory management, timing is everything. Information that informs decisions about when you should release those seats, at what prices, includes things like how frequently are we selling at what capacities? How much inventory should be opened at the on sale? How many seats should we offer and at what prices? And at what point in the sales cycle are we? Also, how do we hold and release inventory so that we can ensure the house is filling from front to back and side to side? And how we ensure that our ticket per caps continue to rise with demand. Data and experience can help us make these decisions. So going back to our earlier example, here's what the new scale plan looked like. And here is what our on sale would look like. Notice that all of our prices are available in the stalls. Based on data analysis, we've built this so that there is enough inventory at each price point to cover the initial sales in a lowest demand situation. In release 1, we bring in more seats at all price levels across the venue. In release 2, you can see the natural progression as we start to release more with growing demand. In release 3, the lowest price inventory here has already been exhausted. So we're only releasing some of the higher price levels, not the very, very bottom at this point. And then from this point, we would continue to release back. And because we're only doing so in the highest demand, we've scaled these seats at top price points. This ensures that we're maximizing our revenue in those demand scenarios. So here are the results. With the improved plan, the venue filled from front to back, side to side. Again, you see the red are the seats that were most frequently seated, and the yellow a little less so. And a person sitting here in the last row is seeing filled seats in front of them. And the house looks great. And imagine how at this point, giving your season ticket holders, your members pre-sale opportunities so that they can get the best seats at the best prices. Imagine what it feels like to sit in this auditorium. It really does feel like a fully sold house, even when it's not.
So that brings us back to dynamic pricing. If you've used those first 2 points, scaling and inventory management correctly, and you're optimized well, then dynamic pricing is the third element of your pricing and demand management strategy and is the icing on the cake in your highest, and remember also lowest with some discounting, demand situations. Now, the key thing for high demand performances is that we're maximizing revenue when we have lightning in a bottle. And how do we do that? By matching price with demand. And remember, it's all about demand here, and either you've got it or you don't. And sometimes, more often than not, that's very much out of our control. So what is a seat worth? Well, it's only worth what you can get. Your inventory and the time to sell it are both limited, so there's lots to take into consideration here. And when we have demand, it's not rational. High demand, or even perception of high demand, think about what inventory management can do here, can cause irrational behavior. Think about your own blockbuster events in your organization. What does high demand look like for you? When do you know you have high demand? What things might you be hearing on the box office when people are calling? We've seen firsthand the impact of blockbuster shows on loyalty and future buying behavior, and how you react is key. Big blockbuster touring shows, for example, like Hamilton in the US, are having a massive impact on subscription and purchase behavior, and we can leverage that high demand for future loyalty. So sometimes we could always get asked, what is the magic formula, especially when it comes to dynamic pricing? What I can tell you is, like a snowflake, that every venue is different. There is no magic formula, and there's no one-size-fits-all strategy. Everyone's high demand situation looks different. The key thing is that you start with an analysis of your data, you make some brave price changes when you have demand, and then monitor it relentlessly as you make those changes to see the impact. With dynamic pricing particularly, it's a cycle. Test and refine, test and refine. If you're data-led in your decisions, you will remove any emotion from pricing decisions. And we see, especially when it comes to price, where the most personal opinion and emotion comes to play, use data here. Be bold and test the limits when you have that high demand situation. You're riding the wave of that. And remember also to involve all of your sales and marketing team in the discussion, because also in these high demand situations, when it comes to your marketing investment, you'll want to keep pouring fuel on the fire of a hit, so you don't leave money on the table, and you can continue to test the maximum price that you can achieve for some of those seats. So let's review a few final tips on implementing a strategy around pricing and demand management. First, we want to plan from a season-wide perspective so that you're ahead of the curve and not operating in panic mode and on the treadmill from show to show. Use data to inform your planning and decision process. And the key thing is to use early discounts to simulate sales, rewarding loyalty along the way, and also using that to attract and retain new buyers. Think about targeting days and times or seating sections that need filling to help with perception of success. And think carefully also in your marketing messaging about how you message that to your patrons. Stop resorting to fire sales when you're in low demand. This weakens your message, undermines loyalty, and also creates bad habits for your buyers. Yes, you might sell tickets, but at what cost? If you've planned, you can react early and use careful discounting strategically with loyalty-based messaging. And remember, if you've got your scale of house and inventory management right, in a low demand situation, your house will still look good. And our motto is that which can be measured can be managed. Use disciplined reporting, use your box office systems and practices to track your sales. Technology helps, but you're in the driving seat here. We counsel clients to have weekly revenue pacing meetings as a team to monitor sales pacing to goal, how is per caps across a run and on a per performance basis, what do fill patterns look like, how are you releasing your seats, do you need to release any seats or can you hang on, and what tickets do you have on hold, do you have any large groups that are on reserve that might affect the fill pattern for some performances.
Great, thank you, Stephen. So now let's hear from someone who has experienced success in demand-based and dynamic pricing firsthand. Claire, I know you have some great, exciting stories to tell, and I'm so pleased that you're here with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
To start us out, can you just tell the audience a bit about Sheffield Theatres?
Of course. We're the largest producing theatre complex outside of London. We've got 3 theatres all on one square in Sheffield. So first off, the Lyceum. It's a beautiful old proscenium arch theatre and it seats around 1,100 people. Then we have the Crucible, which is a Grade 2 brutalist building that houses a large, magnificent thrust stage with a capacity of around 900, and then a smaller studio space as well that seats anywhere between 200 and 400 people. It's very flexible. You can imagine that the diversity of those spaces meant that pricing was quite complex for us, and inventory management was certainly challenging. We approached the Lyceum by pricing it with a 3-tier block pricing structure, and that varied per performance and depended on expected demand. And all the entry-level ticket prices were at the back of the balcony. Meanwhile, in the Crucible, it was a one-price house, and the variation was just by day of the week, and again, expected demand. The audiences in that space consistently chose to sit in the central block rather than down the sides. So when we were experiencing a low selling show, we ended up with an experience that was poor for both the audiences and actually for the actors too.
Great, thank you. So now let's just talk a bit about what was the impetus that drove Sheffield to work with TRG? What was it that inspired you to rethink how you were approaching pricing and demand management?
So public funding accounted for 24% of our income in 2010. And by 2015, that had fallen to 13%. So about £500,000 worth of difference. And we were acutely aware that local authority funding could ultimately disappear. We didn't want to become too reliant on increasing ticket prices, and we were experimenting a lot with different pricing plans, but in all truth, there wasn't a lot of strategy behind it. Our audience numbers were also static, and mapping of that audience showed that they came from more affluent areas, and we were really conscious of the fact that we needed to do something that would help us to reach local people on lower incomes, as well as finding a way to drive revenue. After Dan, our chief executive, attended the executive summit with TRG in November of 2015, Sheffield Theatres began a capacity building consultancy in May 2016, and we quickly identified some key priorities to take a fresh look at the scale of house and pricing strategies, to grow membership, ticket sales and donations, and finally to take a holistic view of the organisation's management and operations.
And the timing of this opportunity was good for you, yes?
Yeah, while we were tinkering with the pricing, we knew that there was more opportunity to be found. We also, as I've said, we didn't want to get into a place where ticket income was so high that we were beholden to that source only, and we didn't want to price out some segments of our audiences. We also had all the other pressures of running an arts organisation, so finding ways to invest in new work, engaging new audiences, and of course thinking about changes like the living wage.
Great. Well, as we mentioned earlier, TRG has a multi-tiered approach to pricing strategy, including its relationship to loyalty. So I'd be interested to hear you tell us about how that resonated with you and also your experience of how that unfolded over time.
So I think what made us really interested in developing a relationship with TRG was that it would help us to look at much more than just pricing. We felt that there was real scope for our membership scheme to grow. And of course, we wanted to optimise the revenue that could bring. So the first thing that we did together was change the scale plans, and that allowed us to drive more revenue when we were in a state of demand. Then we looked at the membership model, and TRG had shown us that growth in our audience database was driven by single ticket households, but that members actually bought 3 times as many tickets as single ticket buyers. Our existing membership scheme, though, was quite cumbersome to communicate and to administer, so we restructured that and we made it simpler. And then finally, one of the things that we've done is we've reviewed and enhanced our marketing campaigns to target and maximise the messaging to each audience. We've applied TRG's recommendations to drive demand. And we've also introduced these regular revenue pacing meetings where we jointly make demand management and dynamic pricing decisions based on the data that we're getting from our system.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about scaling. We've shown some maps earlier. This is actually a map of your seating plan for your annual Panto production, which is a pretty typical scale of house, I think.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's fairly typical. You can see that we've got the highest price seats in the stalls in the front circle, and then the prices get lower as you go back and up with the lowest price seats in the balcony. We were seeing lots of the things that you talked about earlier: empty seats in the front and sides, and people sitting on price breaks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so after reviewing all of your data, looking at where people were sitting in low and high demand performances, looking at the frequency of how often we were selling, to wet capacity, and also the number of seats sold at various prices, and then finally, with discussion with your team, importantly, this is where we landed.
Yeah, this is how TRG recommended that we rescale the Lyceum, and you can see that it is very different. Our balcony here is now priced at the highest level, which was a radical change for us, and I'll be honest and say that it wasn't one that we embraced at first. Our balcony is steep, the legroom is limited, and we couldn't imagine that people would pay a high price to sit up there. But TRG showed us the data, and of course the data doesn't lie. So we could see that the last seats to sell when we were in the highest demand were the cheapest, and nevertheless, and that obviously that doesn't make any sense. So the plan that you can see in front of you does have the highest price seats, higher price seats in the balcony. The original one that TRG presented had those purple gold price price seats, premium price seats at the very back of the balcony. And I have to say, we moderated that proposal, and we moved away from having the premium seats. So we've just got price band A up there at the top. Although when we were talking about it in advance of rolling it out, we felt more comfortable with this version that removed the premium balcony seating. As we went on sale with Panto, we did wish we hadn't booked against TRG's suggestion, because the house did sell exactly as you'd predicted. And you know, we ended up dynamically pricing a lot in that area so that we didn't miss the opportunity. I should also say that these paler yellow seats, this is where we were really delighted, because it brought the lowest price seats down into the stalls on the circle. And actually across the entire season that we launched, we lowered prices for 10,000 tickets, lower than they'd ever been before. And when increasing access was our goal, this made us really excited, because we were able to do both attracting people who wanted the lower price seats to have a great experience, but also growing revenue at the same time.
That's great. I love this story. And of course, after a year of experience, you and the team have changed the map slightly in order to let that seating plan work for you, rather than having to go in there and dynamically price every time. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, the other great story that I love here is that access message and being able to lower ticket price across the season and offer seating in great locations for people that maybe are limited in the amount that they can spend. So fantastic. So once this was completed, here are a couple of images of your heat maps after that pricing and demand management work was completed. So you can see the fill patterns are looking good here.
Yeah. They're exactly what we wanted to see. The audience, you know, filling from the front and working back, and our houses in this format felt full even when they weren't sold out, which was brilliant. That's
great. So let's talk about revenue. How did this strategy perform for you from a revenue standpoint?
So here, this graph is showing revenue figures on the horizontal axis and number of weeks counting down to the performance, counting down to the performance on the bottom. And what you can see is that 2017's pantomime Mother Goose brought in £110,000 more in revenue than the previous year's production of Snow White. And that really surprised us, because we didn't feel that Mother Goose was as strong a title. And the other brilliant thing about this Panto these Panto sales, is that we broke 1 million for the first time ever.
That's exciting, and I remember that moment. That was something to celebrate. So good work there.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing that we like to measure is per capita or ticket yield. And this is an important way of monitoring and managing success as you proceed through your sales cycle. So tell us what we're seeing here.
So this is 6 years of Panto productions across the horizontal axis, and ticket prices on the vertical axis. So the yellow line is the lowest starting price for each production, and the blue line represents the average yield per ticket. And I think what's impressive here is that we were able to lower our starting price for Mother Goose to £15, and yet on average our yield increased by £3.85, which took it to the highest point in our history.
Great. Excellent and exciting. And I know that you have an amazing group of staff. I'm privileged to work with them all the time, and they've worked really hard to implement all of this work. So how are they feeling about the results?
Yeah, we do have a fantastic team here in Sheffield, and I think one of the best outcomes of TRG's work has been the sales team's enthusiasm for it. This is a quote from our sales manager. who's really passionate about increasing revenue, but also about reaching new people. And when you talk to her about the TRG work, she talks about her giddiness, particularly because we're opening access to people who could have never afforded to sit in the stalls for pantomime on the old pricing map. And of course, you know, being able to do that whilst protecting our revenue, I think we can all agree with what she says. It is truly magic.
Fabulous. And of course, Panto has just been one piece of that work that we've done together from a demand management perspective and also loyalty perspective.
Yeah, we've seen revenue increases across multiple productions, whilst, as I said, dropping prices for 10,000 tickets across the year. So overall yield has increased by 14%. Memberships have grown by 35%, and that's helping us to build loyalty and more sustainable revenue sources that we can rely on over the long term. It's been transformational for Sheffield Theatres. The changes to the scale of house plan and the inventory management has improved the experience for the audiences, which was really important to us, but also for the acting companies that are coming through. And we've also started to make fundamental changes to the way that the organisation is operating. And I think, you know, to say that in 2016-17 we created a surplus of £415,000, we've been able to fund things from artistic expansion to greater diversity, outreach, to staff growth, and you know, the list goes on really. And our board's really excited, and we're starting to talk about what we can do next.
Claire, that is really impressive and very inspirational. Thank you. Congratulations to you and your team for all of that great work that you've done to get to this level of success. I know there are even more exciting things ahead, and I look forward to experiencing that with you in the future. So thank you so much for sharing this with us today. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. That was fantastic. So we're at the end of our section of the webinar here, and it's over to you. We've got some time now to take your questions. As Christina said, we'd encourage you to submit those through the Q&A button in the main navigation bar of your screen. Include your name and an organisation, because we might not be able to get to all of them, and we will make sure we get back to you over the next few days personally to answer your question if we don't cover it now. So just type your question in that box and hit send. Let me have a quick look and see what we've got. There's a few, just while Claire was talking there, questions that have come in particularly around those pricing changes and inventory management. So one particularly about our patrons unhappy if they've discovered that seats are on sale in a place in the auditorium which wasn't previously on sale, and also how does selling the balcony at that top price level, did that cause complaints from customers? We do always get these questions when we talk about this work, and something that we will always counsel in this situation is to say that communication and how you talk about these changes is really, really important, and talking about it in the frame of loyalty all the time. So making sure that your box office team are trained to talk positively about changes and are solution focused. So certainly talking about, I know in Sheffield's example and in other organisations, talking about the realities of how you operate. You know, you're a registered charity, and there are some important changes that need to be taken to make sure that the organisation is able to continue to do the great work that it does in the community. And if you book early and if you buy early, you can get a really great seat at a low price in the stalls, but you need to book early. So let's get you on the mailing list and send you the details, and when you book, you can book early. That does encourage a change in buying behaviour, and think about therefore the reduction in marketing costs to market to those audiences when we can start to change that behaviour. Also think about how if a particular price or seat is not available on the day that somebody calls. So let's take Sheffield's example. There's only the balcony left, price A, it's Boxing Day, their highest demand performance for Panto. There may be price A seats still in the stalls on other performance dates. And this is where we can help spread demand across the run with the right discussion. So Boxing Day, this day is a really popular performance. This is the price for this seat. But I can also get you a seat at this price in the stalls 2 weeks earlier on this particular performance. And then there is a choice about the decision that will be made there. In our experience, if we are solution focused and we have open and honest discussions, of course there is initial reaction and discussion, but more often than not, what we see is it's not about price. It is more often about that inventory management, that change in, I'm used to sitting in the seat and that might not be available when on sale. And remember, ultimately, it's the critical mass whose behavior we want to change here. So as long as the majority of the people are doing that, we can make exceptions in certain circumstances, be prepared to have honest discussions. And more often than not, we see that in all cases that there is a real positive change from doing that work.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. Really well said. And I would say just one more thing, that training your box office staff and providing them with the right talking points is really important. And just keeping in mind that it's a process. You're retraining behavior when you partner your pricing strategy with loyalty opportunities. Sometimes in the early days, it requires some education of the patrons. But it's actually, many of our clients tell us how they're surprised at how few people actually are complaining. And of course, they're keeping in mind that that's just a few people. So, this is something that can retrain behavior and build your organization's sustainable revenue. So thank you, Stephen.
Yeah,
well done.
Thank you. Actually, just to say, Christina, while we were talking about that, we've got Sam from Nuffield and Katie from Theatre Royal Stratford, these two organisations that we worked with, both waving the flag there to say that people still book. And Sam said, especially that their box office team now see themselves as important, integral parts of the organisation rather than just transactional team members. They're now a lot more confident about building relationships with customers. I think that's really key, looking at it through the lens of loyalty.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. And hi all. Great point.
I've got a question. You might want to take this one, Christina. There's a few around a similar theme, which is about not being sure whether pricing is right. How can we help gauge? How can we advise gauging whether they're charging too much or too little? And there's a few themes, especially around where there's dynamic pricing that has it got to too high a level. Those sort of themes around whether a price is too high or too low.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. Happy to do that. I think here, this is where I would say data is the key. It's, and we say this all the time, data is the thing that can provide that roadmap and can unveil the truth. And so when we're evaluating pricing, when we go in and start looking at pricing and scaling, we look at 3 to 5 years of data in order to understand what are the trends, and then set those optimal prices and scaling from the very start so that your house is working for you. But from there, it doesn't just stop there. It's critical that you have a regular practice of monitoring and managing. We recommend, actually, and Stephen mentioned it, revenue pacing meetings on a weekly basis. And in those meetings, it's really important that you have goals, that you've set goals for yourself, and then you're monitoring that pacing against goal year over year. Are you where you should be? Watch those seating patterns, watch the price point absorption, meaning how many seats are sold across each of the price levels, and how your per capitas are performing, if they're going up or down. And then it's really just test. Price up when it's warranted, and then monitor then for price resistance. And that would be, the way you can see if there's price resistance would be, a slowing pace at your top price points. Keeping in mind, however, that actually when we look at data from every UK organization, we almost always see demand at the very top of the pricing scale and not at the bottom. So keep that in mind when you're undertaking your dynamic pricing strategy and tactical execution. And of course, we believe strongly in accessibility, as evidenced by lower starting prices and more availability in the stalls, of course, from your scaling perspective. But don't just, if a show's sales are slowing, don't just automatically assume it's price. Keep in mind, it could be other things that are, it could be simply that it's a different type of a title or content that doesn't appeal to the widest group of folks. And the thing to look for there is, if you're not selling a show do you still see entry-level price seats that are available on the plan? Often you do see those, and that just demonstrates that it's not a pricing problem. And then one more final point: in low demand performances, keep in mind that you may want to rethink what success looks like for those types of shows. We do programming analysis work, and we know that there is often a loyalty factor that's in play here, and that certain types of programming are popular among our most loyal audiences, which are, subscribers and multi-buyers and donors and that sort of a thing, even if those shows are not selling out. And so success actually could be something other than revenue. And so data is the key to measuring that. Data is the key also to sort of planning for that and understanding and managing your expectations as you're starting and going through your sales cycle. Anything that you would add, Stephen? Yeah.
No, I think just seeing, just a couple of the comments, particularly around where there may be resistance, which is to say, if there is resistance, you may have found your place, and but be bold to keep that front to back, side to side. But if you've got seats remaining inventory, you still have opportunities to target certain people in your database to those seats with targeted discounts early on. And you can pull back, or you can rescale a few seats. You can do some micro zoning where you would rescale a few seats at a lower price point to see if that keeps the demand building, especially when you get to those last seats at the back of the auditorium. So that's where some careful monitoring when you're in those demand situations is important. There's a few questions around a theme, actually, around size of venue. One question about a venue that charges one price across the whole house and it's small, so what can be done there? And two other questions about different shapes of auditorium. One, where the theatre is in a semicircle, and how there's the release of inventory there with this layout. And so I'll try and cover all of these broadly if I can. And the key thing of shape of venue, and actually Crucible is in that shape, which we rescaled for Sheffield, is whether it be an in the round venue or a horseshoe venue or a small venue, the principles are still the same, in that we want to fill from front to back, side to side. So a horseshoe, where you design a show to be played in the round, or in a horseshoe, the actors are directed to play to all sides of the auditorium. So we want people to be sat there. So we would recommend in a horseshoe or an in the round environment that you would be releasing from front to back all the way around. I think particularly about Tobacco Factory theatres that we worked with that had great success here, where then there was a particular area of the auditorium that was tough to fill and is now filled for every performance, and we used price to motivate that. Think about with a one price house as well, that monitor where people are sitting in a low demand performance, because you might be able to see where patrons value some particular seats, and you might be able to charge more for those and it not be a one price house. Or think about where you may have demand lags across a run or by day of the week. So you may then be able to do price bumps in a one price house where you have higher demand at the weekend to encourage midweek performances to fill, for example. But still, even in the small venue, I think about the studio venues that are one price houses, that we still encourage a gradual release from front to back. So the audience are sat together near the stage, and it's a great environment for the actors and audience as well. Mm-hmm. Is there anything you'd add to that, Christina?
No, I think you did. You said it well. And I love the questions about the horseshoe and the round, the theaters in the round. I mean, the truth is that we see all types of different shapes and sizes of theaters and venues. And of course, this is where the data comes into play. And we can really see very clearly when we take in multiple years of data, how those seating plans are working for you and where that resistance is, and use those scaling and hold and release strategies to fill them. And sometimes the maps look kind of crazy here and there, but yeah, it's a science.
There's a question here. We didn't actually talk about this much in the presentation, but I think it's an important one to answer, actually, which is to talk about best practice around comp tickets. This particular organisation, it looks like they've used comps to fill gaps in the house previously. What would you say is the best practice around this?
Well,
we do talk about comps, don't we?
We do definitely, and it's a good question. And you know, thanks for bringing this up. Actually, many organizations are not even thinking about this, so good for you for thinking about it now. This is what I would say about comps. They are a loyalty killer. Don't do them. And you know, I'm being a little hyperbolic to make a point, but obviously there will be some places and times for comps, but the truth is that we need to manage them. We need to control them. Everyone should be measuring usage of your comps, what percentage of your tickets are being given away, and who's using them. You know, best practice in the UK is less than 5% of your house. So you need to be looking at that. And particularly when you have shows in high demand, if you're giving away those seats that you could be earning revenue on, it becomes painful when we look at that with organizations. So visibility is the first thing. And then next of all, you need to build a comp policy. If you don't already have one, think about how and when you offer comps. Be clear to everybody on what that policy is. So your internal staff, your artistic folks, your marketing team, make sure that we're disciplined about how we're using comps. Whatever you do, don't paper houses. You know, if there are times and places where there will be instances where comps are acceptable and you want to use comps to bring in underprivileged audiences, for example, do that in a targeted and trackable way. Do that in advance, plan for that. Do it purposefully. Be sure that you're targeting through specific and qualified organizations and that you're tracking usage. We also often have contractual seats for artists and press obligations. So we have to honor those things. You know, those are fine. Particularly, I would also say, look at your first nights. Think about how you're handling your tickets for your first nights. A lot of people are giving those tickets away. And often the audiences that we're giving them to are donors or board members, people that could afford to purchase tickets and should be doing so in order to help us sustain our organization and support the health of our organization and the mission-based work that we're doing. And so explaining that to them, yes, give them access, let them have access to those seats and those houses, but ask them to pay for it and explain why. And really, ultimately, I would just say the bottom line is that you need to control and limit your comps, use them purposefully, and have some visibility around it, around what that policy is and how you're actually using those seats.
That's great. I'm going to be really trying and squeeze this last question in 60 seconds and answer it really quickly before we end, which is, how does a late booker learn that they need to book early to get the best price seats? And how do you explain to an online booker looking for low cost tickets that these were available early? Really, really good question. Really, really quickly. The key thing here is messaging, how you publish your prices and what it looks like online. A really good example I'd recommend to look at is New Wolsey, who display on their website whether the prices are starting prices and have search functions to look for different price seats available, and to make sure that all of your messaging and your marketing material is book early for the best seats and best prices. Use online retargeting to target those people that have dropped out potentially because of price as well. There's loads more detail I could go into there, and I would love to. So, but thank you for that question. But messaging is really, really key. And remember that a lot of people are new to File, are new to your organization for the first time. So they may not have a preconceived idea about what those prices may be. And more often than not, we do still see, as Christina said, demand in the top price levels. So often there is still lower priced inventory available later in the sales cycle. But we'd love to talk to you more if you'd like to about that. Thank you. That is all we have time for. My clock is chiming. Thank you. If we didn't get to your question, we will reach out to you with answers directly. This webinar gives you a taste in a quick hour of particularly our pricing council. We will be having more webinars in the future. We'd love to see you there too. If you'd like to take more of a deep dive with us to talk about how to maximize your ticketing inventory based on what your data tells us, you can email Gemma Nelson at letstalk@trgarts.com to set up your personalized scoping conversation. And it really is a conversation. We are passionate about sustainability in the arts and the impact that your organizations have on your communities. So it is a conversation, and we would be happy to talk to you about the right size engagement for your needs. Thank you. And it was lovely to be with you, Christina. I'll let you close.
That's great. Thank you so much, Stephen. And thank you all for attending and for your attention and participation. Claire, thank you so much for being with us today. Your story was so inspirational. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing from everyone with any further questions. So until then, have a great day. Thank you.